Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here, Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the home, the place, the podcast to help you find your best, most true, authentic business voice. Hell, make it your most authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve your results. Absolutely, meet the person of your dreams, make billions of dollars. And today's guest is going to do all that for us because we haven't been able to get that to roll. But here's hoping. Meanwhile, thank you for watching, listening, sharing, liking, and I really believe the reason that you kind folks keep showing up is because we bring people on who walk the walk. Today, I get to introduce to you my buddy, my colleague, the Longevity CEO, which is a very lofty title, by the way.
I'll explain.
Greg Shindler, welcome, man.
John, how are you? Thank you so much.
I'm
so excited to be here. I'm
thrilled, man. And like I said, I get to, every time you and I connect, and I feel really privileged about that, I get to go back to an experience that just does my heart good, which is a group of people led by the running man, Charlie Engle, and a bunch of, I was going to say, of different types, people, and running 30 plus miles or 31 hours, I think is what it was last year.
A lot more miles. It was hours, yeah.
Oh, it was the hours. I'm the one that did 31 miles. I think the real runners did a lot. But this is where it's like you put yourself in situations and you get lucky sometimes. And so I think that's a big part of the willingness to put yourself in situations. Greg, I'll probably work forward to go backwards, but I remember meeting you and you knew stuff. We're in some hot tent in Havre de Grace, Maryland. What apparently nobody knew how to do was get rid of the bugs. But other than that, or the humidity. But I found at that first encounter, I found you fascinating because you knew things. You were aligned with our friend, Charlie Engle. Talk to me about the connection first and then we can get to where it leads, how it's gone, where it's going.
Okay. So first I have to tell you that weekend, you made me feel bad about myself.
Oh God, Jesus. Well, then right off the bat, I'm sorry.
No, I'm kidding a little bit. In that you were a machine, man. Every time I looked up, you were making another lap around that thing. You were going hard. Your sweat's pouring off of you. And I'm sitting in a chair and I'm like, there goes John again. There goes John again. You're passing me by. And I'm like, I think at one point I even asked you, like, how many laps are you going to do? Or how many miles? And you're like, I don't know. I'm up to like 23 or something now.
Yeah.
And I had run like 4, and I was like, damn, I need to get in better shape. I need to do, and running's not really my thing.
Right.
Which is funny that Charlie and I are as close as we are. But I was so impressed with your commitment and how, you had a goal and you got out there and just crushed it lap after lap. And that was not an easy day to be out there running because it was humid and muggy and buggy. And I am
not an endurance runner. Charlie is, and some of the cast and crew, as I would call them, of people who were cool enough to show up and hang out. I'll say the crazier ones that I gravitated to and I loved. I only followed them around because I thought they were great. They were the real like endurance runners and stuff.
There's some dudes out there that are, look, this is what they do. This is their stuff. But I mean, I think we should, tell everybody it was a really good cause. It was, Charlie Engle's celebrating 31 years of sobriety. So he had 31 hours of continuous movement to raise money for scholarships for Ashley Addiction Treatment Center at Havre de Grace. So it was a great cause and everybody came out and supported it. And Charlie moved for 31 hours straight, in the middle of the night, listening to podcasts as he was going around the track alone. at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. But it was a great
Fueling
cause.
overnight, and through the night.
Yeah,
He kept going, man.
yeah, he does. I mean, that's Charlie, that's why
Mhm.
he's Charlie. Um,
God bless him.
but you asked me the connection
Yeah.
there. I met Charlie through a good friend of mine.
Mhm.
Um, and through a business peer-to-peer network
Mhm.
where Charlie had spoken before, and there's like, have you met Charlie Engle? He's great. And I had the clinic, stem cells.
Mhm.
We were doing a lot of orthopedic work, and they said, Charlie and y'all should talk. And so they introduced us, and our very first phone conversation was an hour and a half long. And
Charlie.
I felt like at the end of that conversation, I had known Charlie Engle longer and maybe better than friends
Mhm.
of mine that I've known for 20 years, right? We had this instant connection, this
Mhm.
instant sort of brotherhood, and saw the world and in similar but also unique ways. And I was like, this is a guy I'm going to be friends with for the rest of my life. And it turned out that from there, and so we've done a lot of cool things together around the world, and been a lot of
Mhm.
sometimes shared a stage talking about stuff. And he's just, as he's just one of the amazing humans on the planet.
I love that. And I love the fact that you were describing it. Folks, one of the things that I'm a big believer in, and I wish I had the science guy I'm describing as Greg Shindler. I know you're not a doctor. I know you're not, but I always looked at you in that regard as a knowledge seeker. So for me, I wish I could understand. I do appreciate the fact that there are certain people, when you see them and when you encounter them, like you were saying, an hour and a half conversation with Charlie, you felt like you knew better and longer than a lot of other real relationships for you. That sort of event drew that to me. I
Uh-huh.
traveled to Charlie. I am not an endurance runner. I think, and you're so kind. Anyone who actually watched that, the numerous pats on the heads and "Are you all right?" that I would get coming around.
Hey,
Um,
it don't
I
matter
just,
how we
you
get
take it
there.
with a laugh, but whatever, right? But what I was going to say is there were certain people. You're one of them to me, which like you just look at somebody and you're like, "Oh, this guy's cool." Uh, and you got that with Charlie. I got that with you. I got that with Charlie. There were
Yeah.
certain people that were there. And now, as I said, you take it to the practical side. Talk to us a little bit in regards to the sense as the longevity CEO and your ability to be able to like learn, absorb, share. What got you so interested in the art of living better or the science of living better?
So the longevity CEO was a sort of a term or an introduction when I was going out to talk by a friend of mine
Mhm.
who was introducing me, and he said, "Hey, welcome my good friend Greg Shindler, the longevity CEO."
Mhm.
And I was going to speak and just do a
Mhm.
little education thing on really longevity and cellular medicine specifically.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's okay. That's kind of cool. And then it kind of stuck. And I started thinking more and more about what does that mean? And it was at the time because I was the CEO of a stem cell longevity,
Mhm.
stem cell clinic in Costa Rica. And well, I'll circle back to what
Yeah.
being the CEO, a longevity CEO really means to me. But I got into it. I've been in biologics and orthopedics
Mhm.
and stem cells and stuff since about 2018, which
Mhm.
doesn't sound like a long time, but in
Mhm.
this space, it's fairly, good amount of time.
Mhm.
And we started learning, especially during the pandemic, that you had a lot of time to think about what we were doing and
Right.
the impact that we were making. And, fixing someone's joints and helping them with mobility is
Mhm.
is critical, especially for longevity. And we can talk more about that. But how do we get further upstream to start preventing these things, right? Because we're a society that is really driven by a reactive medicine model. A symptom, a red light goes off, and a pain in the knee or whatever it is, and we go to the doctor,
Mhm.
and then they mask the symptom,
Mhm.
and so you feel better, you don't necessarily get better. So we started thinking about it differently, and where does cellular medicine play in with lifestyle and lifestyle behaviors and
Mhm.
and those kinds of things. And so um I opened that clinic in April of 2021 in San Jose in Costa Rica. And we
Mm,
started tracking the results and seeing the data. And
mm,
it was pretty good, pretty good stuff. And it was pretty encouraging. A lot of it anecdotal. These weren't double blind, placebo, controlled studies. But it was data nonetheless, and we had objectivity in the data for the first time where we could really start to see, is what we're doing making a measurable impact? Is it having, rather than just, the subjectivity of healthcare has always been
mm,
challenging. Because how do you feel, John? Well, if I ask you on the wrong day, you might say not great,
right.
but if you've, been sleeping well or just got back from
Mm,
a yoga retreat, you might be, I feel great.
mm,
So there's a lot of subjectivity in healthcare, and we've always been looking for objectivity in the markers that we could sort of say, well, you don't have to take my word for it. I don't have to take yours. Let's look at
mm,
the data. Let's see what it says.
mm,
And without doing, randomized controlled studies, anecdotal evidence with some sort of markers, and it provides the objectivity you're looking for. So that's really the longevity
mm.
part of that was really built around cellular medicine and what we can do. And you tell me how deep we want to go into all that today, and I'll go as deep as you want to
I
go.
got you. I'm more inclined to think that for myself, selfishly, I'll bring it in terms of the show is all about the easiest way to say it. It's all about resilience and what do you do with it as a result. And so for myself, I love hearing the fact when you talk about 2018 and only 6 years ago. To me, it opens up a myriad of possibilities of, no pun intended, what's possible. Um, why does it, like for you, it's not as if you just fell out of the sky in 2018 and thought, you know what, we're going to do this and this is how it's going to go down. And so for you, what drew you to it? What was the path that got you there?
This is, it's sort of a big question for, at least in terms of my answer.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, I was always looking at things, and at that time,
Mm.
for a few years prior to that, I'd had a little medical distributorship,
Yeah.
30 or 40 reps selling stuff to
Mm.
doctors, basically. And I was always looking to add new products to the portfolio to leverage the customer base that we had with these
Right.
these physicians. And so I'd gone to a conference about biologics, and I didn't know much about it. And the guy who was speaking up there was a PhD, and he was
Mhm.
talking. He could have just been speaking Russian for, because that's how little I understood at the
Mhm.
time. But I understood enough that when the conversation was over, I went up to him and I said, you don't know me. I'm Greg Shindler. I have this
Right.
little medical distributorship.
Mhm.
I like this. It feels like, and arguably I don't understand much about it, but it feels like something that I should start studying and learning more about. And he gave me his card and he said, man, anytime, happy to help
Mhm.
you, happy to sort of mentor you, if you will.
Mhm.
And I said, I hope you mean that, because I'm that guy, right?
Mhm.
Like if I get in, if I sink my teeth in this thing, I'm going all the way. And he did, and he was really, really good about it. And so over the next 8 or 9 months, I really started to learn and understand the science better. And, lights start kind of coming on because it was
Mhm.
fairly complex stuff. And I would have a laptop and two notebooks, and I was studying and Googling online, and I would have to write down the words I didn't understand to look them up to make the study I was, trying to understand
Mhm.
make sense, because there were concepts and words in here you had to get before you could actually try to figure out what the intent of this study was I was trying to explain to you. And I did this for probably 8 or 9 months and learned it. And then I started studying it from the entrepreneur hat, which is, where's this market headed? And you could see double digit CAGR, compounded annual growth that you could
Yeah.
see over the next 5 years was,
Mhm.
depending on the report you believed, anywhere from 18 to 23, 24% CAGR. And I thought, wow, if we can get a little piece of that kind of growth
Mhm.
in our little corner of the world, that's nice. That's a good business you want to be a part of, or at least a trend you want to be a part of. So we cobbled together this portfolio. We started trying to sell it to doctors, and it was a miserable failure. It just, I would go out and call on these doctors, and they didn't understand it. But I made a rookie mistake, even that far along in my career. I was talking to doctors like they understood what I was saying, and they were
Mhm.
nodding like they did. And I don't know if it's because they just didn't want to admit they didn't understand it or what was happening. But I would leave, and of course they wouldn't buy anything. And a few that did, it was an uncomfortable, and I got, conversation around cash and with their patients, and they were used to an insurance model. So I started seeing a lot of flaws in the model that we were trying to do. And out of frustration, I partnered up with a doctor who I'd gotten to know pretty well out of Oklahoma City, and we opened our own clinic and started
Okay.
treating patients because now we understood these products.
Mm-hmm.
We know how to run a business. We know how to market. We know how to get patients. We know how to deliver customer experience. We knew these things as business guys, as entrepreneurs. We needed a good doctor partner, to actually perform all the treatments and diagnosis and all that stuff. And it was great. It was a great team. We started helping a lot of people, and mostly in orthopedics, right? Joints, hips, knees, shoulders, those kinds of things. And we were successful. And then from there, I started opening more clinics and moved into Texas. And that was just about a year before the pandemic.
So maybe not the best timing in terms of, but who the heck knew? I would say, well, you just said something, and I think about like words like inevitability that you can just basically blow holes through, which like knees, hips, joints, shoulders, that sort of thing. There's been, I will give my own age away, but I was going to say that it wasn't that long ago that there was an inevitability that it's like, okay, well, I'm X years old. I am 50 plus. I am 60 plus, and this is how it goes down, right? You were pushing back and on the inevitability or therefore, and doctors that are shaking their heads saying, oh yeah, even though you don't even know if they understood, but we're just kind of yesing along in that sense. One of the things that I appreciate about you is that it requires a lot of bandwidth to push forward. Were you always able to be that guy? Was that always you? What gave you the bandwidth to be like, you know what, I'm just going to keep pushing forward?
So let's go back to this inevitability part, because you touched on something there that I think is really critical for anyone who's listening to hear.
Right.
Aging, we've always felt like it was an inevitable decline or inevitable race to the bottom, however you want to say it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're just on this sort of conveyor belt until we get into 70s and 80s and, see what happens.
Lucky. Yeah, I mean,
if you're lucky.
If you're lucky-ish, right?
And that mindset is one of the things that started to change, and it has to change, right? Because of what we've learned. And you got to remember, this is a nascent industry that's really, and I'll talk about it later around, from 2007, 2012 forward, which is not that long ago.
No,
it's only
gosh.
12, 15 years.
Less than 20 years for the whole cycle.
Less than 20. That's where, things have been exploding. And that's why you hear about longevity every time you turn on TV or pick up a magazine or something. So it's been exploding, but the inevitability part. So it helps to understand it if you frame it in terms of a definition of aging. And this is a very simple one that everybody can kind of agree on. It's aging is the functional decline of a living organism over a period of time, right? And that's a very simple definition. And we functionally decline in our cognition, our immune function, our vascular function, our mobility, aesthetics, sexual wellness. These are the systems and things that we functionally decline in over this period of time, from zero to whatever. If you address the functional decline, if you start thinking about, well, how do I slow and possibly even reverse this functional decline? That's how you get to an improved health span later in life, right? And you slow and reverse that functional decline, and maybe it pushes the period of time part out, which would be great, right? We hear everybody talking about 130, 150 years and all that stuff, and who knows. But really what I think is this last decade or two, if we are going to extend human lifespan potential, then we have to extend the health span. And we do that by slowing and reversing the functional decline. And that's where the focus has to be. And that takes that inevitability of, well, I'm just going to get old and sick and it's going to suck. And, it's not that way anymore.
Yeah.
It's not. And so and there are things that we can all do, and we can talk about those.
I want to.
But I just wanted to address that real quick and
good, because that
and talk about that, because that mindset is not a longevity mindset. And the first thing, and I talk about that as a CEO, longevity CEO too. But let me answer your question about the resilience or
Yeah,
the grit of
yeah,
pushing through. Look, any entrepreneur that has built a business and failed at a business, or been successful at a business, or all of the above,
right,
knows what it takes to do this, right? Or they've learned the hard way,
mhm,
if they've underestimated what it takes.
right,
For me in particular, and you and I've talked a little bit about this. I think it goes back to, childhood, and I don't think I'm unique in this way.
mhm,
A lot of early trauma and or adversity
yeah,
sort of sets the stage in our developmental years for how we're going to survive in the world or how we're going to thrive in the world.
mhm,
And so for me, it was something that I learned at an early age, that I was going to have to pretty much rely on me.
mm,
Um, and if I was gonna get by, and we can dig into that story a little bit if you want. My growing up,
talk to me.
my dad was an alcoholic, the
Mhm,
kind that they make movies about. He was pretty he was pretty sick, and there was a lot of peaks and valleys. He was a little league coach, and I would get in the chair with him at night and watch television shows, like Kojak. You're
right.
you can remember Kojak,
Kelly Savalas.
Streets of
No, I
San
can't remember any of
Francisco,
that. Um,
right? Like we're dating
the
ourselves here, John.
lollipop,
But
Jesus.
we would, like any kid, but then there
Right.
was this dark side when
Yeah.
he was, drinking, that
Mhm,
he could turn on you. And so that was really sort of the first 12 years, and it culminated in a sort of a big finish, if you will, where he, was probably described as a horrific scene if you were a neighbor from across the
mhm,
street watching it. But it ended basically my mom and I on our knees and at the end of a 12 gauge, and he was going to kill us. And he was, fall down drunk, and neighbors are across the street begging him to put the gun down and
mhm,
stuff. And as he turns to face him, I was able to grab my mom, and I was 12 at this point, and get her off the porch. And we got away. We got out of that situation. And then he drove off. And sometime between that day, and that was on a Friday, on Monday over the weekend, he wound up taking his own life with that
mm,
that same 12 gauge. And so that was the first 12 years. And if you ask me, where does
mm,
your grit and resilience come from?
mm,
Probably right there, right? I mean, it probably comes from, you're trying to negotiate and bargain for your life at the end of a 12 gauge, the end of a barrel of a 12 gauge with your dad holding it, right? And so everything as a child
mm.
about adults being safe and adults being caregivers and all this other kind of stuff is really turned upside down now. It's because it's like, whoa, this isn't how this is supposed to go. Um, you start to form survival mechanisms, I think. And one of those for me has been resilience, right? I just, I get knocked down, I get back up and keep going. And that in and of itself is not unique. I think it's just how I got there is probably my part of my story.
Maybe more dramatic, but I want to just one follow-up question with
Sure.
that, which is more of the resilience. I got knocked down, I get back up. Can you remember? And I don't necessarily need you to recall the horrific parts of, as you said, Big Finish. More of, I get fascinated by the sense of, look, the stories are great. Get knocked on your backside, you get up. But what was it like, literally, your seventh grade, eighth grade? Are you at this point shut down? Do you block it out to get past, to get through? What are you doing then to be resilient then? Because I know it changes, but I'm just curious. What were the habits just to get the hell through?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I was thinking about it as you were saying it. So let me frame it like this.
Yeah.
I was an only child, and
Okay. Right.
you kind of grew up knowing that your house is different, your home is, and I was on a street with a bunch of siblings, 4 and 5 siblings in
Oh,
most of the
sure. That
family.
was I'm oldest of five. Yeah.
So yeah, it was like that. And so
Mm,
when it was time to go in every evening from playing with your buddies in the street or whatever, I was alone.
right.
Um, and with a potential powder keg, not always, but a
Often.
lot,
Yeah.
enough. And so you kind of realize that things are different in your house, that I call it being a broken toy, where you don't think everybody knows how
Mhm.
bad it really is, but of course they do, right?
Mhm.
And so you kind of grow up with that, and so you start to wear this armor, or this create this image of things aren't
Mhm.
really as bad. And I think
Mhm.
that's the seeds of where this starts, right? And so then
Right.
after the big finish and after the
Mhm.
suicide, um, I moved to a different part of Houston,
But you're still
and
in Houston.
I'm still in Houston.
Good.
I just went from the south side to a very wealthy section of
Okay.
Houston, um, in the middle of the city.
Mhm.
And so it was a bunch of kids that had all grown up together, and they had grown up privileged, right? I mean,
Right.
I was entering a world of country clubs
Mhm.
and summer camps and
Mhm.
private schools, and this was not the world that I had been
Accustomed
in
to, right? Yeah.
the first 12 years. And
Mhm.
so when you come into there, you're a little bit of an outsider,
Sure.
and even if you're not, it's hard to not. Or from my experience,
Mhm.
I felt that way, right? These kids had grown up together. They knew how to play golf. They'd been to summer camps together, and for since they were 7 and 8 years old.
Mhm.
And so I was a little bit of an outsider. So how do you how do you do it? I think that what happened is I started to become adaptable, right, to my environment, my surroundings,
Okay.
because I
There you go.
needed to fit in.
Mhm.
I needed to be liked, and I needed to
Right.
be
Right.
validated. And I was a validation seeking missile. I don't know this at the time,
Mhm.
but looking back, I got good at fitting in with whatever social group was happening or that I was near. If it was,
Right.
the stoners or the
Yeah.
athletes or the
Yeah.
preppies or I could just move like
Mhm.
water between them because I didn't really have any strong sense of self. It was just I was going to be whoever I needed to be to get liked by that particular group. And while that can probably develop into some form of a skill set,
Yeah.
you pay a big
Sales.
toll. Yes, sales
Right?
100%. But you pay a cost along the way if you don't ever stop and realize, okay,
Mhm.
wait a minute, who am I and where's my
Right.
true north and what's going on? And
Yeah.
and for me, it came way later in life.
Mhm.
But those are some of I think the early things, if I'm answering your
Mhm.
question,
Yeah,
if I
definitely.
understood your question well,
Yeah.
that you start to do as
Mhm.
survival mechanisms. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to be really adaptable, and I'm going to make sure that everybody likes me. And
Mhm.
um, I think that's really kind of where the seeds of some of that resilience really started germinating early.
I love that because that's often the direction which is it's one of the goals of the show. And for me is anything that helps to make the information outward facing because it's so often you hear resilience. And even if the stories are sensational, horrific, or whatever, and the conclusion is, and I just kept going, I that is the answer. And there's nothing wrong with that answer. But the adaptability that you brought up before, that's one thing. There's a positive trait that comes from that. I felt the need to fit in, whether the stoners, the jocks, or the other, the A students, whatever it was, I felt the need. So I did. I just, I don't know, in 2024, as well as in the past, I think the getting started part can be way more difficult than as described. And so you're there. The old cliche, how did that work out for you?
Well, look, I skipped a big part of the
Mhm.
dealing with all of this.
Mhm.
I was seeking external validation for an internal, you know, problem,
Right.
right? And we know that that's typically, that's the thief of joy and the thief of
Mhm.
happiness and things like this. Because when you don't get it, what do? You don't like it, so you don't like that you're not getting it, so we escape. And for me, I discovered pot
Mhm.
and alcohol pretty early.
Mhm.
And in that transition period, I just talked about moving to different neighborhoods and stuff. I
Yeah.
started migrating to, the kids that were on the fringe like I
Mhm.
was, where,
Mhm.
they were sneaking drinks out of their parents' bar. We were, smoking a joint,
Mhm.
walking down the street or whatever. And it was that escape that,
Mhm.
um, look, I always say I have two gears. I have stop and go fast. So I'm either, at zero or I'm at 100
Mhm.
with everything that I
Mhm.
do. If I'm starting a business, if I'm drinking,
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
smoking pot,
Mhm.
doesn't matter what I'm eating.
Mhm.
I'm either going to do it this way or I don't have a middle gear. And so when I discovered how to escape with drugs and alcohol,
Right.
brother, I was, my foot was on the gas and it was all in. And I was terrible at it. Right. I mean, I was a lightweight. I
Mhm.
wasn't, my personality changed. Everything about it was just horrible. But man, in that moment and during those years coming out of that, sort of the trauma and the transition periods,
Mhm.
it became the only way that I could really, well, the only way I knew at the time to cope. And
How
so
I'm sorry.
being likable and escaping were my
Yeah.
two, go-tos.
It's amazing because I have those traits in common. So when I hear them, I I I more am like, oh, I'm almost sorry to hear somebody else does or did, you know. How long was that ride for you? Mine was 29 years, so I'm not competing. I'm
Yeah.
simply saying it's amazing to me. Um, oh my God, you tell a really funny story with a conclusion of something to the effect time just gets away, doesn't it?
Oh, I'll tell you that. Yeah.
So
I love that
for
story.
me, I very intentionally planted that seed, but I was going to say the line worked for me because all of a sudden it's 29 years later for me of the people pleasing and the regression of me and the progression of my own alcoholism. And so I'm just curious with you, how long was that ride?
So I've been sober on September 5th of this year will be 7 years,
Boom.
of
Love it.
continuous sobriety. Um, I had gotten sober before
Mhm.
for 4 years, and um, no, I have to tell you, sort of fill in some gaps there. And then so I spent 3 more years after those 4 years of sobriety, kind of wandering back around again,
Oh, okay.
and then
Okay, gotcha.
sobered up. So
Yeah.
look, I'm 57.
Mhm.
It was a long damn journey of drinking career,
There's your answer, right? And
I'm
that's a perfect place.
57. I've been sober 7 years on September 5th of this year.
Yeah.
And I started drinking at around 12 or 13.
So I'm going 13 to 50 of it. I'm doing my math.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much
37-ish. It's a heck of
with
a
a little
ride, man.
4 year hiatus in there some damn where.
Oh,
But um, yeah, I mean, a
that's a
long
ride.
time, a
Yeah, man,
long
right?
time. And um, yeah, so there's a lot of things along the way. And I think any of us who have been an addict start to
Right.
realize that there is a gift in there, right?
Mhm.
There's a gift that when you finally, admit that this thing has got you and that you're
Yep.
powerless and all of that,
Mhm.
and you start to discover
Mhm.
that the drinking's just a symptom of masking something, that else is going on. And
Mhm.
typically it's, self-loathing and fear and all these other things.
Mhm.
You start getting the tools to do something about it, and you start to learn and become a better, much, much better version of yourself. As long as you don't pour out, for me, as long as I don't pour alcohol in my body,
Yep.
I have a pretty good chance of showing up as a good human that day.
Mhm.
And so I kind of looked at it as a gift like that. And the story you're mentioning was part of one of those gifts.
Mhm.
And I was talking to my sponsor,
Mhm.
and he said to me, "Where are you with forgiveness?" And I said, I think I'm okay. I said, I know that forgiveness is really for me,
Right.
not the other person. I mean,
Yeah.
because look, when you carry it around, you're the one suffering. The other person doesn't suffer. But when you forgive them, you unburden. And whether or not they accept your forgiveness or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of an unburdening for you. And so I said, I think I'm okay. And I said, but, and he was really talking to about my father, my biological father. And I said, I haven't been to the cemetery since I was 12, since he was buried. And this was 5 years ago. And he said, well, that's something, you might want to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And that was on a Monday. And so on Tuesday, I woke up and I'm like, I need to go to the cemetery.
Right.
And I didn't really have a plan. I just was, just thought, all right. Yeah, I didn't want to go. So I knew that was definitely something that I probably should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I got in my car and I drove down. And on the way, I pulled off the freeway 3 different times. Once because it was drizzling rain. Can't go to a cemetery in the rain.
Well,
The second time was because
of muddy grass. So obviously that's out.
100%. You can't do that. The second time it was a Tuesday. It was 10 o'clock in the morning and I got better things to be doing. I'm a busy guy, so I was trying to make all the excuse. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to do this, but I got back on the freeway. And so I exit and I go down and I walk into the building, the main building there in the cemetery. And I didn't know where the gravesite was. I didn't remember. It had been a minute. And the lady's like, there's a very Texas woman. She was just very pretty and in her mid-60s, and her hair was perfect, and she just everything about her just was really kind and sweet. And so she said, may I help you? And I said, yes, ma'am. I need help finding a gravesite. And she said, oh, are you a friend of the family? And I said, no, ma'am. It's actually my dad's gravesite. And she said, well, honey, how long has it been since you've been here? And I said, well, you're going to make me do some math, but, 30, 40 something, I don't know, a long 40 something years. And she's like, time does get away from us, doesn't it? It was the kindest thing she could possibly say. Big smile, warm in her eyes.
Right.
And she looks at me and she goes, time does get away. Now, I just told her that I haven't visited my dad's gravesite. Now, she doesn't know the backstory, right? Like she doesn't. But she's like, I just told her this, and she was letting me off the hook in the kindest way. And I thought it was funny. It was two things. One, it was funny. And two, it was the most Texas thing she could have possibly said.
Right.
And the kindness was almost overwhelming. And so I started laughing. And she started laughing too. And I said, well, thank you. That was really kind. And then this guy, this young man comes out, and I follow him just so he can show me where the gravesite is.
Sure.
And quick sidebar on that is a fairly funny incident that happens there. It's drizzling rain, and I'm standing out there, and I'm kind of getting ready to do whatever I'm going to do there.
Whatever,
and
right?
The guy starts walking back, and he says, I'm going to leave you to say some words and visit. I said, thank you. And he started walking back to his minivan, and he's about halfway there, and he turns around and he comes back towards me, and he pulls a card out of his pocket, and he says, hey, if you ever need to make arrangements for yourself or what, he's trying to sell me a plot right then and there in the rain on a Tuesday, which I thought was awesome, right? Because I was like, and I started laughing, and now he has no idea what to do with this. He's like, sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. And I said, no. I'm not offended at all, dude. I said, I respect the hustle, man. I mean, that has got to be a hard sales job. Can you imagine someone standing there in grief and you got to like turn around and go pitch them on buying a plot?
I mean, you're not going to go to the gravesite because it's drizzling. But this one's going to show up and stand next to you or whatever and be like, oh, hey, while we're here, let's work out some.
Let me try to sell you something while you're here. No, and I told him, I said, look, I'm not offended. I respect the hustle. One sales guy to another, brother, amen, But anyway, so I say some words and I get back in my car and I'm driving home, and I tell this story out of non-linear, out of order for a reason. A few weeks prior, I had said, do you think the boys know me? And to my ex-wife, and she said, I don't think anybody really knows you. And she wasn't trying to hurt my feelings, but it did. And so I started thinking about that. I was like, I was talking about my sons. And I really want to be a knowable person. I want you to be able to say, oh, Greg, yeah, let me tell you these 5 things about it. And I thought, wow, that's not great. And so I'd been thinking about that. And as I was driving home from the cemetery that day, I realized what I said was, do you think the boys know me? I think the real question was, Am I doing a good job? Am I good at this?
Hmm.
And I was so afraid of the answer
Yeah.
that I couldn't even ask that question. I had to ask
Hmm.
a higher level question.
Right.
Do you think they know me? Because if they didn't, well, I was pretty used to that, right? Like I grew up knowing that most people didn't really know me because I was putting on such a front
Hmm.
and an image to get you to like me because I was so terrified of the 12-year-old behind it,
Hmm.
trapped inside that I was used to that. And so I asked a very safe question. And that was a pivotal moment, John, when I call it a gift, this addiction and this, this
Hmm.
recovery really.
Hmm.
Um, that's one of the lessons that I talk about, because if I don't do this, if I'm not on this journey, I don't think I learned that lesson. I don't think I understand that about myself. And I don't think I understand, ask how to ask those hard questions
Wow.
that I think
Hmm.
are vulnerable and meaningful and have an opportunity for me to try to, become better and be better. Does that make sense?
It makes great sense because it leads me to two things. First one, I probably should have saved this to later, but I swear to God, I'll forget. So that's the only reason I'm asking this one sooner. The second has to do with the appreciation of knowledge, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the first part is this. You would say, oh, what are five things? What would you say would maybe even be one or two things about Greg Shindler that people should know about you?
Resilient, loyal, and passionate. Those are the things that I hear a lot.
How
Um,
so? Pull the mask away. How passionate? What? They're
so
great buzzwords, but like I
yeah,
said, take the mask off. What do you mean?
let's do it. So about passion, like around longevity, and if
Mhm.
you hear me speak or when I get, I'm really passionate about this
Mhm.
space, and
Mhm.
so anything that I'm going to do that I'm going to pour my heart and soul
Mhm.
into, I'm just all in. I can't get excited about it if I'm not passionate about it, right? And so creating impact, living with purpose, helping
Mhm.
people, trying to be of service and all of that.
Mhm.
There's a lot of passion around that, and it shows in how I go about this. I built that project in Costa Rica, and I
Sure.
left that in November of last year, and I'm getting ready to do it again right now
Mhm.
in
In another
Cabo.
beautiful part of the world.
In Cabo, yeah, with my partner, and
Mhm.
um, you just when you take these projects on, they're
Mhm.
passion projects, so they're big and they're it's awesome. So there's the passion part,
Help
the
me a little
loyalty
bit though before
part.
you continue.
Yep.
Stay with passion. Um, I get the how. Why? What like you define what the steps are demonstrating that you were passionate. Why? Why does it matter to you?
I got a good chance at Father 2.0.
Oh, how so?
So after the first um 12 years,
Hmm. Hmm.
my stepfather slash adoptive father, he wound up adopting me and I took his last name.
Hmm.
Um he was he became my best friend and mentor, and I am just beyond grateful that he was in my life because he was a successful real estate entrepreneur. He was a college athlete. So he just was disciplined. He led good lifestyle. He was kind, and everywhere I went, it didn't matter where I was, when I would say, hi, I'm Greg Shindler, somebody would say to me, is Jim Schindler your dad? And I said, yes, yes, sir.
Hmm.
Yes, ma'am.
Hmm.
They would say he's one of the finest guys that I've ever met. He's one of the guys that you can set your watch if he tells you he's going to be there. He's one. So I just heard this over and over and over, even in different cities growing up, and it just seemed to be that everywhere I went, people were talking about this man of integrity, this man
Okay.
of his word, and the way he went about his business was
Hmm.
very quiet and very subdued and under the radar. You just
Hmm.
didn't see him. He wasn't a flamboyant guy. I mean, he'd done really well in life, and he continued to drive an old Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. He got a new one every
I
year, but
remember.
that
I
was his big
remember them.
indulgence.
Great. Right.
And he just wasn't that flashy, whatever. He just went about his business, and he was very passionate
Mm-hmm.
about who he was and how he showed up in the world. If he
Mm-hmm.
was said he was good, so being on time was everything. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of a generational thing, but like he wasn't late ever.
The
You
integrity
don't.
part mattered.
And if he said he was going to do something, so that there, and I saw this passion for being this person of his character that was behind him, and so I modeled it. I mean, I followed him down the ski slope. Everything he did, I learned to ski like him because he was a really good skier, and I looked just like him. So I started modeling everything that he did.
Mm-hmm.
The way he was very organized in his
Mm-hmm.
drawers, and when I was a kid, I would reorganize things in his drawers just to kind of mess with him, and I would come back and they would be put back the way he liked them, but he never said a word. Not one time. I would take his camera and his comb and move them on his shelf, and he was hyper organized, right?
Yeah.
So I started becoming this way.
Mm-hmm.
And he was my best friend. Honestly, I
Mm-hmm.
spent more time with him than my buddies and my
Right.
guy friends, or even my family to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in October, well, in 2010, earlier in that year, he started having health problems, and he'd gone to the doctor, and he had some blockage in his heart, and he was a really healthy dude.
Mm-hmm.
He had lung cancer back when I was a senior in high school, and he beat that.
Mm.
He's a man of faith, and so
Mm-hmm.
he he had watched his mom die a year earlier of lung cancer, and she'd gone through chemo and done all the standard stuff. Um, and he was by her bedside, and it was horrific. And so he said, "No, we're not doing chemo."
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor's like, "Well, you have less than a 30% chance of surviving this if you don't do chemotherapy." And he said, "Well, if it's my time, I'm going to a better place." He was a man of deep faith. And we're like, you gotta listen to the doctors. And he's like, in his exact words, pardon me, but he goes, "You're not putting that shit in my body." And he prayed.
Wow.
They cut out half of his right lung, and he
Mm-hmm.
prayed, and he beat cancer, and lived another 40 years or whatever. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about his passion. So he
Yes.
gets sick, his heart's not well. He goes in and he has this heart surgery thing,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not quite right after that. And he struggles to kind of come back. And he was a competitive guy, and he was a go-getter. He was up early. He just guy
Mm-hmm.
couldn't, he was always moving stuff. Um, and he's struggling, and we talked about it, and he didn't want to be a burden. It was the last thing in the world because he took care of everybody. He was not about to be taken care of or be a burden. And I didn't understand the depths of how passionate he was about that
Right.
until October 7th of 2010. I was driving, and I got a phone call from a family member who uh, said that he was dead. And I was driving between Austin and Dallas. I was closer to Dallas, so I wound up driving straight to the airport and jumping on a Southwest flight down to Houston. And when I got there, um, I was driven to a storage unit facility that was across the street from this high rise they lived in.
Mm.
And there was yellow police tape, and I could see he had a Chevy Tahoe, and I could see it with the doors open, and it was sort of parked, kind of in the middle of the road there in the storage unit thing. And I learned that morning he had gotten up and um, done a few things like put gas in the cars and gone to the grocery store and washed the cars and restocked the pantry and stuff and put little index cards and plants about watering them through and 3 times a week.
Mm.
And then he went across the street and he went into a storage unit and he took his own life. Um, and so, for me, that was like lightning had struck twice,
Mm-hmm.
under completely different circumstances and completely different, people, and dynamics. But it hit hard. It hit really hard. So
Mm.
my passion comes from modeling and honoring this guy that I looked up
Acknowledging
to.
all the great things that
He was one of the
did.
he was one of the dudes, man. I mean, like, look, he was so committed to his faith that he thought he could beat cancer through prayer. Now, if that's not passion and commitment and faith, then I don't know what it is, you know? So when I tell you, he was committed to being on time, he was committed to to working out, to being, he just lived his life that way. And I think that why? Because if I can show up as a tenth of the guy he was, then it's going to be a good day.
Shoot, that's that. First off, thank you. I'm sorry that you needed to retell that story, but honest to God, thank you. That helps me, man, and I hope it helps those watching and listening, honoring and acknowledging a hero. And what I would say is, you gave me three passionate, resilient. Greg, I forgot the third one. Loyal.
Loyalty, yeah.
And loyalty, right? Why does loyalty matter to you so much? And how does it manifest itself now?
I don't think either one of us need to be a psychiatrist or psychologist to figure this one out. But
Well, I know the definition, but what
no,
I'm
I
saying
just
is, how
mean,
does it
why does it
manifest
matter to
in
me so
you?
much?
Yeah, to you.
I think probably,
Mm.
um, with sort of early childhood trauma has sort of
Right.
informed it. But no, I feel like, John, I don't have, when I get in the past, if I got screwed over,
Right.
by someone in a business
Mhm.
deal or whatever,
Mhm.
I'd be like, damn it, why don't I ever see it coming? And I was told, because you don't think that way.
Mhm.
Don't ever change, but listen to
Mhm.
me next time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and there's some wisdom in there, is
Mhm.
because when you don't think so, for me, being a loyal friend isn't,
Mhm.
there's no trophy or attaboys or whatever. It's
Mhm.
just the cover charge for being a basic human, a decent human, is you're loyal to your friends and to your
Mhm.
family and to the people that you care about, and to the people that you work with. And
Mhm.
I look at this too. I think we're all products in the open market, and
Right.
people want to know if they're going to get a good return on their investment in their
Mhm.
time in you, right? So
Mhm.
if you're with your partner, or whoever it is that you're spending time with and is spending a lot of time with you, are they going to get a good return on that investment? And to
Mhm.
me, loyalty is
Mhm.
one of the
Mhm.
metrics that
Mhm.
you can measure the return on that investment.
Wow.
It's like,
Mhm.
you think about this, right? When you
Mhm.
invest your heart and soul and time and life into
Mhm.
people, am I getting a good return on that investment if we're products in the open market? And I think loyalty is a great way, as a KPI, if you will, to measure that.
God, thank you. Love, beautifully said. Thank you for that too. And I believe in my heart we covered a fair amount of the resilience part. And so I love the fact that you bring them to life rather than give definitions or directives. That was really all I was driving at. But now,
Yeah.
like I said, one of the things that I wanted to just take that as a pathway to this. One of the things that I am deeply appreciative to you, for you both, about is the sense that you tend, or you've learned, not to squander time. You've also learned to use information and appreciate. And as it relates to this longevity, improve quality of life, making the time count, whether it's in your physical, in your mindset, or what have you. And you talked about building this path in regards to first it manifesting, like in the business, and then manifesting in Costa Rica. And now we're talking about the manifestation of literally the next move in Cabo, in Mexico. You've been gathering this information. I would imagine the resilience part often has to be, it's a relatively short period of time that these mind-blowing and life-changing scientific bits of information and resources have been coming. First off, how do you keep up with the speed of it? Because it's certainly not the traditional, the doctors, as you said earlier, nodding their heads, right? I now personally work with an integrative medicine doctor and a primary care doctor, and my primary care doctor, just based on time, left the practice, retired, and now there's somebody much younger, and I don't need to do as much explaining or proving as it regards to testosterone replacement theory, and that's just the basics. How do you keep up with the speed of the advancements?
It's hard. I don't know that you do.
Okay.
I had a couple of researchers that this full-time job is to go out there and kind of, honestly, I think maybe AI is going to be our best hope for this because people have been
Okay.
feeding the literature and the
Mhm.
studies and stuff into AI
Mhm.
for years now, 3 or 4
Right.
years, and started to train it and teach it, and it's starting to kind of learn, which in and of itself can be a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of confusion, I mean, you look at biohackers and you look at, Peter Attia and you look at, Tony who are all these guys,
Sure.
Sinclair, Asprey, they're all talking about different
Mhm.
aspects of health and longevity, and it's really easy to become overwhelmed, right? And then
Yes.
like, what's what? And then you get
Mhm.
another guy on there who's basically got a counter argument to everything they said. Now you don't know
Mhm.
who to believe, and
Mhm.
you look at studies, and then somebody points out that studies can be kind of, slanted to, so now you're really confused, and more
Mhm.
importantly, beyond confused, you're discouraged because you
Mhm.
just don't know what to believe. It's kind of like politics, right? You just don't know who's telling you the damn truth.
Mhm.
And so keeping up with it is really, I have a network, in this longevity nerddom
Yeah.
I'm in,
I love
um
that.
no, it's true. I mean, these
But it's
guys are some
great. The
smart
nerd
people.
part is what I'm loving. Anyway, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I mean, look, I'm a longevity nerd, and
I love it.
um I love these guys, and so I've got a good network of people, and I was just on the phone yesterday with a friend of mine in California who's a physician,
Mhm.
and he's a top three dude in the world, and we were talking about some stuff, and I saw him do this little injection into his stomach while we were on
Right.
the Zoom,
Right.
and I'm like, what's that? What is
Yeah.
that? And he goes, it's NAD. And I'm like, you're doing NAD sub Q? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, tell me more. And so he starts talking about how he's using sub Q injections with NAD, you know, in lower dosages to try to can it. It's kind of similar with testosterone therapy. You know how like you used to do it once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever it was. You do an IM injection.
Once a
Yeah.
quarter was
Okay.
the first thing I did. The
No,
first way that it went, I totally got you. But what I was going to say is the first time was for me. I'll spare you the details, but other than to say, were the pellets, and that was once a quarter,
yeah. Well, the
right? And
pellets are,
that was,
they
but that's how
release.
I understood. It's not like you know what I mean. I did a limited amount of scientific research, and I would, but this is why
Well,
I'm
the
asking.
pellets release for people who don't want to continue to do
Right?
shots, but there's still a problem with peak and valley, right? So
Yeah.
it's working and then it's
Mhm.
not,
Yeah.
and then as the older we get, it's not
Mhm.
necessarily about libido and all that. It's really more about mood for
Mhm.
a lot of guys
Right.
with low T.
Mhm.
But the idea is you really want to kind of keep it a
Mhm.
little bit flat, right?
Mhm.
Instead of the peak and valley. And
Mhm.
so he was explaining the same thing. So
Well,
having those
that's it.
kinds
And
of relate,
meanwhile, on a Zoom call, this in the nerddom kingdom, on a Zoom call, this person feels comfortable enough that not after the call's over, I'm just going to do it right here, right
yeah, I
now.
mean, look,
You know what I mean? Like I said,
he's awesome.
I love it, but I
And then he
love
shares it with me.
normalcy. That, you
So
know?
it's having those relationships and then just trying to share it, right? So I try to
Right.
educate people as much as possible. And you and I were talking about this longevity thing the other day.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of it all? Look, at the end of the day, first, don't get yourself overwhelmed because it's
Hmm.
really easy to do.
Hmm.
Um, we take it in bite-sized chunks. And I think you and I had this conversation recently where we were talking about, you know, if you haven't taken care of yourself, or if you're not eating well, if you're not working out,
Hmm.
or you're not doing some of the lifestyle things that you want to do and maybe you feel like you should be doing, but you just
Hmm.
quite haven't, it's easy to start lying to yourself, right? Like where you,
Yes.
and what I mean by that is, all right, tomorrow morning I'm going to the gym, right? I'm going to go to the gym,
Mm,
and you don't go. And then that happens, 2 or 3 days in a row or
mm,
a week or something. You start to become like a friend that you can't depend on, right? If you had a friend that was going to come over and help you fix your fence and he kept putting
mm,
you off every day after day after day after day after saying he was going to be there,
mm,
you'd be looking for a different friend to help you with your fence, right? You'd be like, this guy's not reliable. He's not going to do it. He's not dependable. Well, we do that to ourselves a lot, and so when we get overwhelmed, it's really easy to pull back and negotiate with ourselves. I'm too
mm,
busy. I'm tired. I got the kids. I got this. I worked. My boss was. So it's easy to do all that. So the first thing is don't get overwhelmed. Don't become deliberately confused by yourself. Pick one thing, right? If it's going to
mm,
start with diet, let's just start dialing that in a little bit,
mm,
right? Let's just start working on, let's say, a calorie budget, right? So like for myself, right this week I'm on 1,566 calories a
mm,
day. The last 12 weeks it was 1,740. And so then I create my little macros. And in the beginning, it's a little bit of a learning curve and a little bit of a discipline, but it becomes so routine and so rote after you know what you're putting in your body that it sort of gets on autopilot because I know, I do tend to eat a lot of the same things every day. So that helps. But,
mm,
there's a little thing and I dial it in because nutrition's really important around inflammation. What we put in our body either
mm.
contributes to or fights
Yep.
inflammation when it comes to food. And so you say, okay, great, do that. And then now let's tackle sleep. Well, you don't
Mm,
have to get overwhelmed with sleep and people want to do hot baths and breath work and
mm,
get off of Ambien and put on eye masks and
mm,
all that's well and good. But what I recommend to people is try something that works for you. Maybe melatonin in the
mm,
beginning. You take a little melatonin 30 minutes before bed. I have an aura ring, so I can kind of tell how I'm sleeping. It's
mm,
fabulous. I love it. Um, and maybe that works for a couple of weeks and then doesn't, right? When then we turn
mm,
off our screens an hour or two, or so you just start kind of playing with some things
mm.
that you can live with that aren't obtrusive. That it's kind of like going on a fad diet. That when you break it, you gain all the weight right back because it sucked.
Can you stay there for 1 second?
Yeah.
And I don't mean hold, but what I was going to say is here's the thing. The way that you're describing it, and by the way, folks, every fiber of my being wants to go into the depths of cellular. See, I can't even say the word still.
Cellular medicine.
Cellular,
I
thank you.
got you.
Every fiber wants to head there. But to me, where I get stuck or I choose to get stuck is often in the minutia or in the stop start. So for me personally, selfishly, the path I chose today in this conversation was more of a pattern. How do you interrupt patterns? How do you like stop a pattern? For some people, why I ask about the resilience and all that sort of thing, it's like that there's a part of it where you're like, okay, you just have to do the work and you just have to. And I wonder, without overthinking it, like rather than beat yourself up, like what are good ways to get back on the climb? I guess that is what I'm trying to say.
The one first thing is why, right? Like, so
Mm,
discover your why. And I think that's really under
mm,
represented
right.
is, look, John,
This is what you and me talked about earlier, and that's like and previously, and I want this is what I want to focus on.
I had I had an 89-year-old patient
Right.
who said, I want 10 more years with my wife and daughter.
Mhm.
Like, so his
That's
why
just an
was
easy why
really
question.
clear.
And it's right, right. You don't need to ask again why. Makes
He
sense,
was it was
right?
really clear, right?
Uh,
He was 89, he was facing, his mortality and he wanted 10 a decade with his wife. And so
right.
and the guy walked the walk, right? He's a
Mhm,
dear friend of mine and he wound up passing away at 92. Um, so he didn't get it. But
mhm,
his why was very clear, right? And I
yep,
think it really helps. Like
mm,
if you go to the doctor and you have a really good old school doctor who looks you in the eye and he says, if you keep doing this,
mhm,
you're going to die. If
mhm,
you keep eating this way or you keep,
right.
doing this bad behavior, you're going to die. You're going to orphan your kids and your wife. You're going to, it should get your attention, right? And then better, there may be a why in there, right? Like I don't want to
Yeah,
orphan my kids. I want to see grandkids. I want to
mhm,
do whatever. Or I have a bucket list, or there's a legacy I want to leave behind, or there's some things that I haven't done yet for humanity that I want to do,
Yeah.
or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
A why certainly helps, right? And I'll do this. I
Nice.
have on my mirror
Right.
in my bathroom, and it's,
Mhm.
it's sort of, fraternity or, dorm room kind of stuff, but I have markers. I have dry erase markers
And use the bathroom
toothpaste
mirror?
in a toothpaste cup in my
Oh
bathroom
my God,
vanity.
I love this.
And so I take a dry erase marker
Right?
and I have I write on there. Sometimes in the left corner, sometimes across the middle of it. And like right now, what's on there says,
Yeah.
"I love you." Because I read this thing recently where
Yeah.
you should get up in the morning and look
Mhm.
in the mirror, and stare yourself in the eyes and say,
Mhm.
"I love you." Right.
Mhm.
And like really mean it, like tell
Mhm.
yourself that you love you
Mhm.
and that you're enough and all this. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try this for a week. And so I wrote, and just to remind me, but in the corner is always grit. I'm a huge fan of
Right?
grit,
Mhm.
right? I think there's just, I taught my sons that you may not be the most talented or the most gifted in the room or the smartest, but you can outwork pretty much most people. If you're willing to you just grit and grind and you become a
Yeah.
grinder, you can outwork a lot of problems. You can outwork a lot of shortcomings and deficits that you may have. Just hard work will get you a lot farther sometimes.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that when you if
Mhm.
you've got a talent deficit or something. And so I'm a huge fan of grit. I taught them that early. So grit, resilience, persistence. Um, and then the other one says, who is my future self? Right? Like who am I? And I'm always trying to
Mhm.
think about aspirationally, what are some values that I like and that I want to
Mhm.
have, but I don't necessarily inhabit today?
Mhm.
And what would that look like? Right. And so what does my future self look like? And not just, money and cars and houses, not that.
Mhm.
W- For me, it's about joy. And do I wake up in the morning and am I joyful? If everything in my life were taken from me, would I still have joy?
Mhm.
Right? Like if I, lost my stuff, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that we have,
Yeah.
would I still have joy? And that's a really hard question for me to answer, right? Because
Mhm.
I feel like I wouldn't. But I aspire to be in a
That
place
person.
that has that person, thank
Mhm.
you, that has the capability to find joy in
Mhm.
just waking up, right? Being on the right side of the grass and taking a breath and being able to walk outside and feel sunshine on your skin. Like I want to get to that place, and I don't know that I necessarily am right now, but things can be aspirational. So I write those little things in my mirror.
I think it's incredible, and it's funny because as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh, I could do that. Uh,
It's a
you know what I mean? It's
reminder.
like heck, it's like dry erase mirror is the code word, and thanks to Amazon, you could have your dry erase markers in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
be there this afternoon.
right? And but this is the thing. See, this is why, to no pun intended, um, it's this is the part like I love the fact, and I'm only going to introduce because there's certainly more to follow. That you are so big in terms of like you've got a ton of projects, you got a new podcast that's breaking, which is exciting as hell for me. Also very selfishly exciting for me.
Yeah, you're
But
gonna be
you know what
on.
I mean?
You're coming on.
Longevity powered by you. And also I want to talk more in regards to discovering me. The reason I was asking the other things and the whys and stuff is not a shameless plug for your shows, although it certainly looks that way. But yes, Your Honor. But I'm gonna say, but really what it was why the hell does it matter? Because I, in my acknowledging you, um, aside from the fact that what I said before, I just literally looked at you in the tent in Havre de Grace, Maryland, and thought, oh, that guy's cool. Um, and then I'm going to act all, tough guy weird and what are your intentions, and that would have been sad to get beat up by somebody who I think is so cool, but what I'm saying is it's that you are willing now not only to drop the mask. That was, like I said again, you're not only willing to drop it, but you're talking about aspiring to be people and bringing others along for the ride. What would you say are your best and what would you like to see happen with these two new projects? Away from viewers and subscribers and all that nonsense, what would you like to see happen?
So we're talking about the clinic and discovering me.
The clinic, and exactly the Cabo clinic, as well as the outward facing, the podcast, the YouTube series and all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah. Okay.
What would you like to see happen?
So on the podcast, it's called Longevity Powered by You, and the idea
Mhm.
was, look, when you say you're going to do a podcast, it's like, oh, okay, you too, and
Oh yeah, great.
I mean, so what, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if you have something you want to say, and
Mhm.
there's there's always somebody who wants to hear it, and
Mhm.
so more power. So my thought was, there's a lot of stuff out there about the science, right? You can watch stuff
Google it.
on NMN and resveratrol and
Yep.
biohacking and activated charcoal and VO2 max and stuff till you're ad nauseum, right? I mean, there's just tons of it out there.
Mhm.
And then there's people who have done really cool things, like our friend Charlie Engle, right?
Sure.
Who ran across the Sahara Desert and
Yep.
created water.org, right?
Mhm.
How do you take those two things and bring them together and create an intersection where science meets motivation, right? And so the idea of, if we can live healthier longer,
Mhm.
the question that I thought of was, why would we want to, right? Like,
Okay.
what's your why and what would you do? So if somebody could wave a wand today and said, hey, you could live to 150, right? And you would be healthy, you wouldn't be bedridden and stuff. What would you do with that extra time?
Mhm.
You could almost create an existential crisis on that question, right? Because if
Absolutely.
you're
Do I
57
really
now and
want
somebody
the
tells
time?
you got another 90 years here,
Yikes.
what would you do?
Mhm.
Would you go back to school? Would you start learning? What would there's a lot of would you anyway? And so the idea is, I have access to these really cool guys on
Yeah.
science motivation, and I have
Yeah.
access to people like you where you're guys that are saying, look, I beat myself up for a number of years. I woke up one day and said, this doesn't work anymore. It sucks.
Mhm.
And now I want to be healthier. And let me tell you why.
Mhm.
Right. And some of those stories and the answers are really surprising when I ask people this question,
Right.
either on a plane or just, at a conference or friends of mine or colleagues. And I'm like, I wonder
Mhm.
if there's a show there. I wonder if people would want to discover sort of, you're learning more about longevity, and I'm going to strip it away. One of my superpowers, I've been told, is to take these complex concepts and really break them down into bite-sized chunks that people can really understand, like
Yeah.
anyone can understand it. And I want to do that. But I also really want to have people share their stories, because if one person hears something relatable that goes, huh, maybe they find their why, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they discover their why through someone else's eyes or someone else's story. And then they've got enough meat in the science and medicine behind how we're going to live a little healthier longer,
Mhm.
that they start to say, you know what, I'm gonna pursue my path on this. This feels like it's more doable than I originally thought. I saw people that come into the clinic, and it was kind of a Hail Mary, right? Because
Yeah.
they were 60 something, they were out of shape and overweight, and it smoked and it drank, and it just from a health standpoint been kind of a train wreck. And they were like, look, I'm hoping this is going to turn everything around. And I said, look, stem cells don't work like that, right? I mean, it may make you feel better for a while, but man, 75, 80% of this battle is really lifestyle behavior. And all of those things go back to the cell.
Mhm.
But as we start to age, if we're not talking about fixing some pain,
Yeah.
in the cellular environment, cellular medicine really plays a role in all of that. But it's not going to just eradicate all this bad lifestyle, right? Like, it just
Damn.
doesn't work that way. It's biology.
Right.
And it may, and so, but what would happen, not all the time, but
Mhm.
what would happen is they would be, it's expensive, right? So they were spending
Well,
this
yeah.
money, and they would say, okay, I'm
Mhm.
making this investment. I'm going to do this. Um, they would start to lose the weight,
Mhm.
and they would start to feel better. And then their knees didn't hurt. And then they had more energy, and then they were, thinking clear, and they would come back and and they're trying to credit cellular medicine, the stem cells, for all of this. And I'm like, stop, man. You're the hero of the story because A, you made a decision. Acknowledge that. Give yourself some credit there. B,
Right.
you actually made the investment. And then C, you did the work. The stem cells are just a tool, right, in the toolbox. And we're just a guide to show you a plan to achieve success and avoid failure. But the hero of the story is always the person who's making the decision, who's got the mindset, who says, all right, I'm going to do this, makes the investment, and then does the work. And
Mhm.
you should acknowledge it. And, and whether that's like the lifestyle stuff we've been talking about,
Yeah.
but what happened was, we've seen it go both ways. People would make this investment in stem cells and then think, well, man, I've already done this, so I should be living healthier, right? And they would go back to home and get a nutritionist or a trainer or do whatever, maybe on their own. I would see them 6 months later and they would be 30 or 40 pounds lighter and their skin looked great and they looked
Yeah.
healthy and they're like, man, those stem cells are amazing. And I'm like, wait a minute. Stem cells didn't make you lose 40 pounds. All right. You did something. And they're like, well, yeah, I went and got a trainer and started eating
Mhm.
better because I felt so much better after I got the stem cells. Now that may be true, right? You may have had an energy burst. You may have some cognitive improvement there for a few months, but that was enough to be the catalyst, if you will,
Right.
for them to make some lifestyle changes and behavioral changes. And so that happens fairly frequently, right? With people who are maybe a little bit there, and then it persists. Then you love the way you feel, you love the way
Mhm.
you look, you love the way you're thinking and sleeping and everything else. So it sticks.
So that's where I come back to my acknowledgement of you, the grit. You were about to say something, and I
Yep,
so
because I wandered
I know
way
you.
off.
That's
Sorry.
don't be.
That was longevity powered by you.
Yeah.
So how do we tell those stories? Thank you. Discovering me, I'll do it quickly.
Yeah.
It's really, I'm going to try to be as vulnerable and raw and authentic as possible
And personal and all that.
and
Right.
personal
Yeah.
and man, and
Hard to sell.
I'm working with my son on this and it's a
How
project
old's your
where
son now?
he's 25.
Great. Okay, cool. So he's coming in from an adult perspective. Great.
He's coming in. He's got something to say as well. He's a great storyteller. He's a musician.
Nice.
Incredibly bright.
Mhm.
Um, and I asked him, would he want to go on this journey with me? And we're really going to go back to where it all began
Right.
and then follow it. But the whole idea here is
Mhm.
to really kind of chart out, ask that age old question of who am I,
Mhm.
right? But for a guy who spent a lot of his life seeking external validation and needing approval and outside, from
Exactly.
others,
Yeah.
I didn't really know who I was
Mhm.
because of that. As I got older and started to become more and more comfortable with the imperfections and the that are me, and all of that, I started to learn more about it. And I thought, man, this would be a really cool way to tell a story about trying to discover yourself and the
Mhm.
process of
Mhm.
doing so. And let's document it and see if anybody finds it interesting. So that's what that's about.
I love it.
Um, and we're going to kick that off next month. And then, um, my, we mentioned Cabo. We're doing a
Oh,
clinic
this
that's
is just because
this is unbelievable.
this part.
This is cellular medicine. And so Los
Mhm.
Cabos is one of the most beautiful places, in the world. It's super accessible from,
Mhm.
a lot of states, right?
Right.
California, Arizona,
It's
Washington,
literally side by
Texas,
side in California. And
Colorado.
yeah,
So
right.
you have all these people coming down there. There's these beautiful homes and easy to get in and out of. Um, there's a neighborhood down there called Palmilla that's iconic. It's been there about 30 years, developed
Okay.
by a gentleman named Ron Hatfield out of Houston, Texas, who was a contemporary of my father's. And he had this piece of land, and he's a big believer in longevity. This man is 82 years old. He's
Mhm.
doing jujitsu, boxing, weightlifting in the mornings, every morning at the gym in Cabo. When I go there, he's already there and he's already sweating. And I get to the gym at 6. So this is who this guy is. So he said
And he's already there at 82.
he built this
Almost
neighborhood.
went over my head. Never
This is yeah, he's already there at
Jeez.
82.
Yeah, exactly. And you're coming
And
in like some
so
straggler at 6 a.m.
he found out about what I was doing in
Right.
the longevity space, and my partner had gone and talked to him about, well, could we possibly build something
Mhm.
here at Palmilla for your residents and other
Mhm.
people who want to come to Cabo? And he loved the idea. So that became Colel at
Mhm.
Palmilla. And so we're building this 21,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility with, a lab, 3 clean rooms, and, 16 treatment rooms and ORs and all this kind of stuff. It's going to be beautiful
Mhm.
with ocean view.
Mm.
So it's this what we would probably call luxury longevity, if you really think about it
Sure.
categorically from Duff and
Sure.
Media marketing plan,
Mhm.
is this luxury. It's a very VIP sort of luxury longevity lifestyle with cellular medicine, where we're
Mhm.
going to be doing a lot of the things that
Love it.
that we can do to help people age with
Mhm.
grace and vitality. At the end of the day, that's it. And I'm really looking this time to help with more of this mindset shift, right? Because people think that, back to the top of the conversation, the inevitability.
Yeah.
This is part of getting old. Well,
Mhm.
there's a mindset now that move to one floor living.
Mhm.
Nope,
Right.
not
Right.
doing that.
Mhm.
Or do less. You just got to slow down. Bullshit. Put your
Yeah.
foot on the gas
Yeah.
when you're 78, 80, and let's live life with vitality and
Yeah.
everything else. There's a lot of people who will think this way. Now, if we can make sure your health will keep up with that mindset,
Mhm.
brother, look, we've lost enough collective wisdom, and we certainly aren't doesn't feel like creating a lot more of it right now. But the amount of wisdom that we have in that part of our population, with our grandparents and
Yeah.
with people who are like, we need this to live longer.
Mhm.
We need
Mhm.
more of
Mhm.
that wisdom that comes around like that. And that's one of the selfish reasons I like to see people living
Mhm.
healthier longer is, man, if you sat down and had a conversation with an 80-year-old that you've never met before
Mhm.
at a bus stop or in a train station waiting on a
Right.
train, and just started talking to someone,
Mhm.
it is a it is a it's a revelation. It is unlike any other conversation you will have, that day or that week or maybe even that year. I love it. It's amazing. And so I find myself gravitating when I'm doing this to sitting down and talking to someone, because they got nuggets of wisdom and lessons that they've learned, that they're unfiltered, and I call it their give a shitometer is broken. They don't really care. They've earned the right not to give a what about what you think about what they're going to say. And I love the unbridled, unfiltered wisdom of an 80-year-old that comes into this now. And for me, there's a great perspective on longevity there. So sorry, again, I married the
No big.
tangent, but Los Cabos opens in April or
Mhm.
May of
Mhm.
2025. It's probably when the building, so let's call it May, June.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a world-class state-of-the-art facility that we're going to do cellular medicine, longevity,
Mhm.
functional medicine. I've got some incredible strategic partners that I'll start talking more about in another month or so.
Sure.
Um, the scientific and medical advisory board looks like a who's who. So really pulled out all the stops on this one, and we're really excited about it. It's got a lot of early buzz, and people are, kind of saying, "Hey, I found out about this. How
Mhm.
do we get involved?" And so we're excited about it. It's really going to be a lot of fun.
I'm
Help a lot
excited
of
for
people.
you. Well, and lastly, I will say this for the moment, which is you just did something. By the way, I love the fact in terms of it. One more reason I acknowledge you in that the every price point, every age, everybody you've pretty much touched upon in terms of ways that you don't have to feel left out, or that's not for me, or that's something I can do someday, but not now, or it's to this or to, and I love the fact that you pretty much got everybody. However, I'll add one more thing that I especially loved, which was it's fun to see someone's energy change when you were describing talking to like the 80 some odd year old people, and all of a sudden you like light up. You just did it again, and you light up because it matters. So you just there watching you, listening, feeling you was the sense of, oh, that's why. Oh, that's why. Oh, okay, that's it. And it's beautiful. Greg Shindler, the fact that you drop a mask for me, you were the quiet guy who I thought was cool. That's how it right away. Quiet. Sorry.
Fooled you.
Everyone. The quiet hot guy that was like, oh, doctor, the quiet hot doctor.
I
That
really fooled you.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. But that you're willing and able to drop the mask and continue to drop the mask, give people reasons why they can and should. Um, and be the jolt to get people to take action. Greg Shindler, thanks so much, man, for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, John. I love our conversations, and I look forward to having another one with you really soon.
Heck yeah, absolutely. And we will have all of you at gregshindler.com. We'll have all your cool information right there, so nobody's going to have to guess where to find you. But in the meantime, as I said, I know where to find you. And folks, You've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. I meant it. We walk the walk because we bring great, cool people like Greg Shindler along for the ride, and they're willing to be here. So thank you, folks. And we'll be back with more. Be well, stay well. We'll talk soon. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.